Good evening. You're watching Fairfield Public Access TV. My name is Connie Boyer, and Susan Kessel is not with us tonight for our Opening Fairfield Doors show. She's on a nice little trip in Australia. I hope she's having a good time. And today's guest is Scott Reneker from the Auditor's Office. And it's a very busy time in the Auditor's Office. As we know, the election day is next week. So Scott, I was with Scott last week at a meeting, and he presented some really useful information as people go into the day where we go to the voting booth. So I thought it would be a great chance to talk with Scott about what's happening in the Auditor's Office and what goes on there, and a little bit about Scott. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and where you went to school?
Sure. I grew up in Fairfield, and my folks moved here when I was 2 years old, so it's the only home I've ever known, Fairfield, Iowa. Graduated from Fairfield High School in 1980, and then I went to Iowa State University, where I graduated with a degree in finance in 1984. I've been Jefferson County Auditor now. I'm nearing the completion of my second term, so that's 8 years that I've held this position. And that's the briefest of my background.
Well, great. So tell us some of the things that happen in the Auditor's Office on a day-to-day basis.
Well, we're highly visible during the election season because in Iowa, auditors serve as commissioners of election. In other states, clerks of court do that assignment, for instance. But in Iowa, auditors are commissioners of election. That's where we get the most of our visibility. A lot of people don't know what we do in addition to that, and I've always described it to people as having 7 major areas of responsibility. We serve as the budget official for the county. We compile the operating budget and present that for public hearing and so forth. That's a rather large assignment that we're responsible for. We figure taxable valuations. The county assessor determines 100% values, market values in a lot of cases, and in the auditor's office we're given that information, then we compute a taxable value. It's much like when you have your gross income for federal tax purposes and then you arrive at a net taxable. Well, it's similar for property tax. The assessor figures the market value, the 100% value. The county auditors in Iowa figure the taxable value. We also prepare the tax bills. A lot of people don't realize our role in that. We prepare all the data, do the calculations, enter the various credits, homestead, ag land, family farm, and then we transfer that data to the county treasurer for her to then send tax bills to all of the property tax owners in the county.
Yeah, I just figured that just came out of the treasurer's office.
No, it's work that's done in the county auditor's office. We do all the calculations, the math, and arrive at an abstract of values and property taxes and so forth. And then the data is transferred to the treasurer's office for billing and collection. We do the financial accounting, all of the payroll, 941 W-2s, those kinds of things. Keep the general ledger. It's a business office function that we have in the auditor's office. As I mentioned earlier, Commissioner of Elections, all of the various elections, school elections, primary, general, franchise, we're the office that's responsible for putting those together. We keep the voter registration records in the county auditor's office. Secretary to the Board of Supervisors is a clerical assignment, prepare their minute book and so forth.
Now, is that something you do personally, or?
No, I've had those on my staff that will sit in the boardroom, and it's a matter of typing minutes and so forth for them.
Okay.
I have done it in the past, but we're kind of doing the cross-training thing now, so a lot of my staff is getting an opportunity to work with that assignment. And we're also the official Plat. And what that is we keep up to date and accurate real estate ownership records. So if you want to know who owns a certain piece of property in Jefferson County today, you come into the county auditor's office and we've got a Plat book, and we have the name of the owner on an aerial photograph. And a lot of our traffic throughout the course of the year are abstractors and attorneys and surveyors that are reviewing the official Plat records.
And that's just public knowledge. If I want to know who lives on a certain piece of property, I can find that out from you.
That's right. And we also make photocopies for customers of parcels of property and ownership records. Other than elections, really the the traffic that we see in the office has a lot to do with the official plat aspect of our responsibilities.
Are those all the areas that you mentioned then? Did we hit them all?
I've hit all the big ones. That's right.
Okay. How many staff do you have in your office now?
There are 5 of us now. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us.
Okay.
Right.
And has some of the things that you've done over the years changed so that things are more in computer and easier to do? What are some of those changes that have happened over the last few years?
Well, one of the things that I anticipate changing in the near future has to do with the computerization of some of our transfer records. We now keep, as we have for 150 years, a manual record of real estate transfers, and I would like for us to computerize that, and so I look for that change to happen before too many more years, a couple of years. But the programs are just becoming available, and it's on the horizon and something that I want to explore. That's one of the things I think in terms of what I anticipate in the future. I know that we've got a new assignment coming, and it's going to be a very complex and time-consuming task. So it has to do with a Governmental Accounting Standards Board GASB 34 requirement that we have a fixed asset inventory, and I see that as requiring a good deal of time and effort on the part of the staff in the auditor's office. So those are some of the things that are coming.
Yeah. Okay, good. So now I heard on the radio this morning, and you can tell us if this is accurate. Okay, now this is Monday the 30th.
Right.
And they said this was the last day to register if you're going to vote next week.
That's not accurate. The close of registration in Iowa was Saturday, October the 28th, this past Saturday at 5 p.m. So you would have had to have met the registration requirement in Jefferson County by that date, or you would not be qualified to vote next Tuesday.
Okay. Well, I guess maybe I should correct myself, because as I recall, I think they said that you could no longer register today. So maybe they were talking that Saturday was the last day.
Saturday was the last day.
Okay. So
now, if you've got a change that you need to make to an active registration, say you've moved within the county, you can do that any day. So you can even do that on election day.
Okay.
So that's no problem. If you've moved from one precinct to another, you can accomplish that change anytime. But a brand new registration to Jefferson County, we would have had to have received it by Saturday at 5 o'clock.
Okay, that's great. Now, one question I had, for some of the students that maybe graduated a couple years ago from high school, and they probably registered when they were in high school, because I think they do that as part of one of their classes.
That's right.
Now, if they have not voted in an election, are they still able to vote? I mean, how long is that time span good for?
Well, in a lot of instances, the students that register when they turn 18 in high school are going on to college. And Iowa law allows for those that are going to college to choose which location they wish to vote. If they're going out of county to a different county to college, they can register and vote there, or they can continue to maintain their voting residence in Jefferson County and vote here. Unless they've done something that's caused us to know that they wish to be registered somewhere else, and it's only been 2 years, it's likely that they're still on our list. And they certainly are eligible, assuming that they're college students, to continue to vote in Jefferson County.
Okay, great. That's good to know for all those parents who have kids out there, that they can still vote, even though they may not have voted yet in their adult life.
Right.
Okay, great. Let's see, what else we want to talk about? We want to talk about the number of registered voters in Jefferson County.
Sure.
That was one item that we touched on the other night.
I've got some fairly up-to-date numbers here. Since we had the close of registration just last Saturday, we'll get a new printout with the most current information in about a couple of days, maybe towards the end of the week. But this report was done on October the 1st, and in Jefferson County on October the 1st, we have 5,637 Republicans, 1,957 Democrats, 4,165 no parties, for a grand total of 11,759 total registered voters on the list.
And no parties, that basically, I'm curious, particularly in Jefferson County when we have the home of the Natural Law Party, does all the third parties basically, they just count as no party as far as your statistics go, and is that uniform throughout the country, or do you even know?
Well, in Iowa, the only three options that a voter has are Democrat, Republican, and no party.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
A couple of years ago, there was a fourth option, reform, but they've since been dropped from our Iowa form because they didn't meet minimum vote requirements in a given election. So
for this year they didn't meet the requirements?
It was for an election a couple of years ago. So they're no longer an option in Iowa. Other states may very well have more options than we do. But since there's only the three options, voters are selecting one of the three, and it's the voter's choice. So if we have Natural Law Party voters in our county, they likely will be opting for the no party category, although a lot of people are finding that they don't like the phone calls and the junk mail and so forth. So Republicans are registering as no party, Democrats are registering as no party. It's just whatever the voter decides.
Yeah.
Sure.
So there's a lot of variables in
right.
choosing that particular status.
Right.
So, okay, well that's interesting to know, and I can, certainly understand, people do get tired sometimes of the phone calls, and if they don't want to be really active in one of those parties, then they can just kind of pull back and.
Yeah, and I think that registering as no party probably accomplishes that, because the major political parties are first going to target those that have registered as Democrat or Republican.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Let's see. We touched on the registration law. Was there anything else that we needed to talk about that? Any points we missed?
Well, maybe I'll just restate for the listening audience the qualifications of a voter in Iowa. We have talked about the need to be registered, and that there is a close to registration prior to certain elections. And so in order to participate next Tuesday, you would have to have met that requirement. And in order to register in Iowa, you must be a citizen of the United States, you must be a resident of Iowa, you must maintain your home in Jefferson County, you have to be at least 17 and a half years old, although unless you turn 18 by election day, you cannot vote. You have to be 18 to vote, but you can register 6 months before your 18th birthday. You cannot be convicted of a felony, you cannot be judged mentally incompetent by a court, and you have to give up your right to vote anywhere else. So whenever someone is interested in registering and qualifying to vote in Jefferson County, they have to read those requirements. They swear and affirm that they qualify after having read those. They sign their name, and then if you sign this statement and you know it is not true, you can be convicted and fined up to $7,500 or jail for up to 5 years.
Wow.
So each of us that registered to vote read those requirements and signed knowing that not meeting those requirements was punishable by Iowa law. So,
right, so if you vote here and then run down to Mount Pleasant and think you're going to vote again down there,
yeah,
then you
not
might...
advisable, no.
You might be having a new place to sleep at night,
yeah.
huh? Okay, well, those are good pieces of information to know. Absentee ballots, that's been a big issue, I think, particularly in Jefferson County and probably all over the country as people's lives are busier and they don't want to take the time, or because of work, et cetera. But I'm sure there's various reasons why they actually don't want to physically go and vote. What are those options then with the absentee ballot?
Well, it used to be that there was a requirement that you, in order to qualify to receive an absentee ballot, that you be absent, unable to go to the polls on election day and so forth. And in Iowa now they're interpreting the law to allow for any voter that wishes to vote early by absentee. And it's definitely become a very popular trend. People are liking the convenience of being able to request a ballot and have it mailed to their home. They can spend a comfortable amount of time with it as they mark it and get it back. They don't have to fight the crowds at the precinct on election day. And the major political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, have been promoting this type of voting. They're targeting who they think is going to vote for their candidates. They're doing mass mailings. Maybe you've gotten one where it's a little detachable postcard. You put a stamp on it, you sign your name, and you mail it to the county auditor's office.
Okay, so that didn't come from your office. That came from the parties.
Yeah, people think that it comes from the County Commissioner of Elections office, but it does not. It comes from the Iowa Republican Party or the Iowa Democratic Party. They've done those. And so it's really convenient for people. They simply need to sign their name, date it, put a stamp on it, they mail it to us, then we prepare and mail them an absentee ballot. And that's probably the main reason why there's been increasing interest in numbers of absentee voters. I just left the office a half an hour ago, and we're approaching 1,400 that have voted by absentee so far in our county. And what's significant about that number of voters is that we expect on Election Day, if we can base it on past elections, between 7,500 and 8,500 total voters. Of the 11,700 that we've got on the list, we're looking for between 7,500 and 8,500 showing up, and 1,400 of them have already shown up. So that's between 15 and 20% of expected voters have already voted. So
what are the deadlines as far as requesting an absentee ballot? And then when does that absentee ballot have to be back in your office? Okay,
you can request an absentee ballot up through the day before the election, which would be Monday, November the 6th.
Okay.
And you can vote in our office anytime. The office is open. We're open next Saturday from 8 to 4, and our Monday through Friday hours are 8 to 4:30. So if you wanted to vote by absentee next Monday, on the last day that you can vote by absentee, we're open from 8 to 4:30. If you have a ballot that you've received by mail, you have to have it postmarked by that Monday, November the 6th.
Okay.
And mail it to us. We're not going to get it before the 7th, before Election Day, but it still can be counted if we receive it by November the 13th at noon, which is the canvass of the election.
Now I'm curious, the absentee ballots that you have in your office already right now, are they sealed until after Election Day, or are they already started to be counted?
No, they remain sealed until Election Day.
Okay.
And during the day on Election Day, we have an absentee precinct. 5 election officials serve on that precinct, and they begin to compare the written request with the affidavit that contains the ballot. Then they can open the affidavit envelope and begin the process of counting the ballots. And generally, we have to have them counted by election night at, I think, 10 p.m., but we've always been able to have absentee results shortly after 9 o'clock. We can't release them until the polls close at 9, but since the work can be done throughout the course of the day on Election Day, we expect to have results just right at the close of polls for the absentee, but they have to remain sealed until that point in time.
Okay, good. That's interesting. And to me, like, one other point about absentee ballots is, like, for parents and college kids. Now, the parents cannot come and pick up their college student's ballot, correct?
That's right. Although they can facilitate that in that they can see that their son or daughter completes the request form. We have to have the voter's signature on the application request form. But we're finding a lot of parents are hand delivering that to us. The kids are home for the weekend and they're coming in with them. And we're required by law to mail the ballot to the student. Okay. No voter can come in to our office and leave with an unvoted ballot. They can vote it if they're, but they can't leave with a ballot for their son or their daughter.
Okay.
And
okay, so that's a good thing to know. One issue that we talked about also was when a voter is challenged. Now, there's going to be poll watchers at the table there as you come in. Can you tell us some of those rules and some of that procedures and some of the things that the people are required to do, whether they're a poll watcher or they're actually working there?
In Iowa law, and I expect that it's this case in all of the states in the United States of America, there is a provision for being able to question voters whom a fellow voter suspects or knows has some knowledge about them not being qualified to vote in a certain precinct or county. And I think that one important point to make is that how we vote is nobody's business but our own. We're required to vote in secrecy behind a curtain on election day, and no one is to know how we vote. That's not anybody else's business but our own. But the fact that you are voting is everybody's business. It's a public election, and we all have a right to know who participates in Jefferson County elections. That's not a secret. And so on election day, voters that arrive at precincts have had to first met that requirement, registered to vote, and all of those qualifications that we talked about with the registration. And then in the event that there's a poll watcher or any voter that's also in the precinct has a right to, if they have knowledge or suspect that a voter isn't qualified, they can question the voter. And in Iowa, the questioning is called a challenge. So let's say that I show up to vote in the 4th Ward, where I'm supposed to be on election day, and there are poll watchers there who question my qualifications to vote. Then what happens next is there's 5 precinct election officials, and there's a chairman that is in charge of the 4th Ward precinct. That chairman gets involved at this point, and then the challenger and myself and this chairman go off to the side, and the chairman asks 4 questions, and this is all stated in the code. They'll ask me where I maintain my home, and I'll say 304 East Broadway. How long have you maintained your home at that address? 10 years. Do I maintain a home at any other location? No. And my age. And I'll answer those 4 questions as the challenged voter. Then the challenger is either satisfied or not. And if I've answered the questions to his satisfaction, he's the one that determines whether or not he lifts his challenge. And if he says, okay, that's fine, I'm satisfied at this point, then I vote in the usual manner. If he says, no, I have some knowledge to suggest otherwise, and I want to continue to have this challenge.
Does he tell why he thinks that
he needs
you're
to
not
he needs to have
a registered
reason.
Voter?
Yeah, you wouldn't challenge someone. The Iowa Code requires that you have knowledge or suspect that a voter is not qualified. So if a challenger wishes to question another voter's qualifications, they darn well better have some knowledge or some reason, which they have to then, they have to give a reason why they're questioning a voter's qualifications. And if it progresses to the point where the challenge is not lifted after the questions have been asked, then the voter votes a ballot, the regular ballot that we all vote, except it's put in a special envelope. And 2 days after the election it'll be Thursday, November the 9th, the special precinct board convenes, and they examine written evidence provided by the challenger and the person that's been challenged, and they deliberate and make a decision as to whether the ballot's going to be counted or not. Mm-hmm. So there's a procedure, it's all set forth in law, and it has to do with a need that the public has to have confidence in the election process in America, to know that it's open, it's publicly, it's for the public to know who's voting, and that we can participate and watch the actual voters vote and so forth.
But it shouldn't be an uncomfortable thing that's happening. There shouldn't be people getting angry and uncomfortable, and because that voter has the right to vote, period.
Yeah, no one has ever denied the right to vote, and it's something that very few voters are educated about, this questioning aspect of, potential questioning aspect of them presenting themselves as a voter. If voters become informed about that, I would advise every voter to have with them a driver's license with a color ID, their voter registration card, and the knowledge that it's a public election and that they're entering a public venue, and people are interested in knowing who's participating in local elections.
And you mentioned one of the voting elections will announce that person's name, correct? After they've signed in, and they say it loud enough that people at the table, at the other end of the table, can hear it. Is that correct?
That's right, and maybe voters have noticed that that occurs. It's supposed to. Iowa law requires that the precinct election officials announce the voter's name out loud. And voters haven't understood why that's being done. It seems like kind of an invasion at some level that their name is being spoken out loud throughout the precinct. But the reason for that is that there are interested parties, oftentimes poll watchers, that are sitting there. Generally, what poll watchers are doing on behalf of their political party is reviewing a list of voters, and then as a new voter comes in, presents themselves at the table to vote, they need to know who that voter is. The election officials have to announce their name out loud. Then they get busy and look through their list and mark them off as someone that's voted. And what they're trying to do is encourage and get their voters to the polls. So they're keeping score right along with the election officials. Then they communicate back to headquarters where there are telephones, and they say, John Smith, he's one of our guys, let's give him a call and try to get him here today.
So primarily there'll be a Republican poll watcher and a Democratic poll watcher, is that correct?
Yes, and those poll watchers are selected by the respective Republican Central Committee, Democratic Central Committee. They're the ones that determine who's going to be in a particular precinct at a particular hour, and there can be as many as 3 poll watchers, 3 Democratic poll watchers, 3 Republican poll watchers in the polls on Election Day. I doubt that in our county we see that
many. Many as 3 at a time?
3 at a time, sure. I doubt that we see that many, just because it's sometimes hard to recruit people to watch the polls. But yeah, they're generally, I guess what I'd expect, if based on past experiences, that voters will see 1 Democrat and 1 Republican sitting off to the side as poll watchers.
And the list that they have, will they have just a list of Republicans, and the Democrats will just have a list of people that are registered as Democrats?
It's done a variety of ways. I would expect that they would want to have the most current listing of all the eligible voters in whatever precinct, and would be a Republican, no party, Democrat. They'd want to have them all, and they'd just go through and try to keep track of each and every person that votes on Election Day.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to also make it known that those that are voting by absentee, that is publicly known as well. We generate a lot of public records from those that are voting absentee, and the 1,400 that have voted so far, there's a record in my office. It's reviewed daily. We've got interested people coming in to see who's voted so far for all the same reasons as those that show up on Election Day to watch polls. These people are keeping track of who's voted so far. And those voters can be challenged as well. So the challenging aspect of our election law in Iowa pertains to absentees as well as those showing up on Election Day.
Oh, interesting. For the poll watcher, if they're going to challenge someone, they don't raise a flag, or do they talk to the head official, or what do they? What's their process to get that challenge going?
Well, they simply would make it known to the election board workers that they're questioning the qualifications of a voter.
Okay.
And hopefully they'll do that in one never knows what's going to happen, but I don't look for anything this time. But
we just hope that when and if it does happen, that it's handled in a dignified manner.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
and that everyone is calm about and stays calm about the situation and
Well,
follows the 4 questions and, you know.
And maybe this will serve as some measure of an education for those that have never understood that the questioning aspect of our elections in Iowa is a possibility. I mean, it's nice to know that.
Right. Well, I mean, I've never heard some of these things before, and, you know, I'm not sure where this is taught, you know, and
I don't know that it is.
I've worked at the polls years ago, and, you know, I'm helping getting poll watchers this time around, and, you know, this is kind of all new to me, and, of course, I've never seen anyone challenged, and I'm sure it doesn't.
Nor have I.
Really, I'm sure it doesn't happen that often, but from time to time, I'm sure it, you know, it does come about, and probably not so much in Fairfield, maybe in, you know, maybe in a larger city, maybe it would happen more. I'm not sure.
I've heard that it used to be more of a practice in years past, you know, our parents or grandparents' age, when there was more active scrutiny perhaps, or we knew each other differently or something back then. But it's always been a part of Iowa law.
Yeah. Is there something about that envelope we need to say?
Oh, I had just brought with me, I didn't know which direction we were going to go, but when voters vote by absentee, one of the things that they frequently are curious about is this secrecy envelope. And knowing in Iowa that it's no one's business but your own how you vote, they note that they're putting their voted ballot in an envelope with their name all over it and a serial number and so forth, and there's some uncomfortableness about the possibility of someone being able to learn how they voted if they're sensitive about that. Well, what has been devised is the secrecy envelope, and the voter is instructed to fold their ballot in half, slip it in this little half sleeve, and then seal that in the envelope. Then when the absentee board gets to looking at the affidavit to make sure that the signature appears as it's supposed to, then the envelope is opened and the contents are dumped onto a table, and the ballot's secret in this secrecy envelope. It ends up in a big pile on a table. It's kind of mixed around with all the other 1,400 or 1,500 ballots before they're removed from the sleeve.
Oh, okay.
So that's how voters knowledge of a voter's vote is kept secret when you vote absentee. A lot of people are curious about that, I think.
Yeah, well, that seems like a good system that would work pretty well, and I can see where somebody might get a little uncomfortable about just slipping the ballot in the first envelope.
Right.
So, yeah. You mentioned some things that are new on the ballot, or some things that are on there that come up from time to time that people are curious about or don't really know.
Yeah, in last Wednesday's Fairfield Ledger, there was published a sample ballot for Jefferson County. And the reason we're required to publish sample ballots is so that voters can familiarize themselves with all of the options and positions on the ballot and come prepared to vote on Election Day. It's not very widely known that there's a time limit on the amount, on how long you can spend in a voting booth, but in Iowa you've got 3 minutes to mark your ballot. And the reason
3 minutes, huh?
3 minutes is,
oh gosh, I didn't realize that.
Even for a ballot where there's information on both sides, that's ample time if you've come prepared, if you've studied the sample ballot that was in the newspaper, and if you haven't, on Election Day in the precinct they'll have the sample ballots posted on the wall. So voters, please review the sample ballot before you enter a voting booth and know how you're going to mark the ballot. And that keeps the lines moving more evenly and smoothly. And it's a consideration that we show for our fellow voters that are lining up. If we try to keep it under 3 minutes, what I've noticed in the auditor's office is that, and this was before the sample appeared in the newspaper, but voters were going in, they're getting their ballot, and they're spending 10 minutes with it in my office in the voting booth, because they're seeing all this unexpected information that they're asked to consider. And what you'll find on the ballot in Jefferson County this time are federal offices for President and Vice President, a federal office for U.S. Representative 3rd District, state offices for State Representative 94th District, county offices for Board of Supervisors, County Auditor, and County Sheriff. And township offices, township trustee if you live in unincorporated areas of the county. Then on the back are nonpartisan offices for hospital trustee, soil and water conservation commissioner, county agricultural extension council, and a judicial ballot. These are judges that are currently on the bench and we're voting whether to retain them or not, so it's a yes or no question. And then the most asked question with regard to this year's ballot is the Constitutional Convention question, and it's found on the back of the ballot. It reads, shall there be a convention to revise the Constitution and propose amendment or amendments to same? And the voters asked to vote yes or no. And what I've learned about this, there's been so little publicity on it, that I've seen anyway, but apparently the Iowa Constitution requires that once every 10 years, this question be presented to the voters for their consideration. No one's promoting it one way or the other this time. It was on the ballot in 1990, and it was in 1980 and 1970 before that, and it'll be on the ballot again in 2010. But, and I've also learned that the measure, the question, it goes down in defeat by wider and wider margins.
So apparently, yeah, people have always voted no on that issue.
Right.
Okay.
And, you know, people are coming out scratching their heads. They've never heard of the question and wonder why it's on there, and that's what little I know about it.
Okay. Yeah, well, it seems like in times past, I too have gone into the booth and said, I've never heard anything about this particular issue, and feel kind of uninformed and, oh gee whiz, what if I vote wrong, or maybe not wrong, but with not the knowledge that I should have going in there, and you're conscientious and you want to do the right thing, and
absolutely.
So you get concerned.
Well, and yeah, voters do, and they do want, by and large, to do the right thing, and that's again why we have sample ballots posted for people to review, and that's why there's this advance notice in the newspapers. So that
I think it would be nice if somebody would write an article about the different judges before election time.
Yeah, do you think our local paper wants to take that on?
Yeah,
maybe they will.
Maybe we can call over there and ask them, because you don't know these people.
Very few do.
You don't really know what their philosophy is and how they sentence people, and all those kinds of things that go along with their position. So I will have to admit, one year, and this was many years ago, I put no on every single one of them.
Yeah, well, that's
so.
Some people use that as a strategy, maybe just to.
I think I was frustrated at the time. That people were just getting off scot-free for being terribly ornery.
Right.
So anyway.
But I had heard over the years that maybe the local bar association or somewhere there's somebody that kind of scores these judges for voters, but I've never seen it. Yeah. That lawyer next door, maybe ask him or something.
So are there any other issues that we need to touch on before the election next Tuesday? Well,
I thought that maybe one additional bit of information that people perhaps are curious about, a technical aspect of our election process, and I brought a little prop with me, but voters, when they come to a precinct on election day, and again remembering that how we vote is a secret in Iowa, are issued their ballot in this gray secrecy sleeve, and they're presented with it with an instruction that the initials of a precinct election official must appear at the bottom in this little opening. And then they go into the booth, they mark it, they slip it back in this sleeve and hand the sleeve to the election worker. And the question is, why are we initialing and marking an official ballot? Well, the reason for that is that it would not be a difficult thing for someone that is desiring to corrupt an election to print ballots, an exact duplicate of an official ballot. And therefore, the election workers, they put you can't replicate someone's initials very readily, especially if you don't know who's going to be initialing the ballot, but they're to look for the initials before the ballot is deposited back in the box, and they're not to deposit any ballot that doesn't have initials on it. So that's to ensure that each ballot that is voted is a legitimate and official ballot, and not one that's come in under a bulky winter coat or something from a private printer. in an effort to stuff a ballot box.
Oh, great. Well, that's good information to know. I mean, I was curious. I mean, I've always wondered that myself, but never took the time to ask or think it through. That makes sense.
Yeah, there's generally reasons why even these, we scratch our heads as to why people are announcing our names out loud sometimes and why they're initialing a ballot and so forth, and just might be helpful for people to understand that a little more.
Yes, great. Well, we appreciate all those things that you shared today, and I really hope that people will get out and vote on Tuesday, and that this is a right that you have that many people in the world do not have, and we're very, very fortunate. And now we understand some of this process and why it makes it, I don't want to say safe, but makes it so that we are able to do that, and we have that right. It's a great thing that we have in the United States.
Absolutely it is, and obviously we encourage everyone to participate in the election, and we all need to collectively studiously endeavor, to ensure that we prevent fraud, deceit, and abuse in all of our elections. And that's what the legislatures were thinking when they crafted some of these rules and so forth. And if we're all good citizens and interested in the process, that's the way things will go.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Scott,
Sure
for taking
thing.
your time out from your busy day and such a busy time of the year, too, to do this and to help educate our voters and our Fairfield people.
Very happy to do so.
So, hope you enjoyed this program and help you understand a little bit more about the voting process.
Thank you.